Evening. My name is Thack Dyson. I'm the rector of St. Paul's Church in Daphne, and welcome to our second presentation of this three-part series featuring Dr. Catherine Meeks. At this time, I would like to introduce Bishop Russell to offer the invocation.
Thanks, Thack. Good evening, everybody. It's good to have everybody together. I want to pray a prayer from our prayer book that's one of my favorites. It's a collect for the human family. Let us pray. Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time, all nations, all races, all people may serve you in harmony and peace around your heavenly throne, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I'd like to welcome back those of you who were with us last week, and I would also like to welcome those who are new this week. And if you are new, I'd like to give you a little background about why we're here and what brought us to this program. And as I mentioned at the introduction, I'm a member of the Jubilee Committee. As most of you know, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary here as a diocese. And about a year and a half ago, Bishop Russell convened a group of folks, a large group of folks, to plan diocesan activities, programs, special worship and ministry opportunities to celebrate our golden anniversary. In utilizing the theme, Remember, Reorient, and Renew, the Jubilee Committee's calendar of events was designed to offer opportunities not only for recollection of the past, but also for recommitting ourselves to our Christian discipleship, reinvigorating our faith, and moving forward with restored energy and vigor. With Bishop Russell's leadership, the committee adopted a calendar of activities that broke the year into thirds, each emphasizing a word from the theme. The first part of the year, for example, was dedicated to remembering, which included everything from the history of the diocese and individual churches to reacquainting ourselves with the diocesan agencies, Wilmer Hall, Beckwith Camp and Conference Center, and Murray House. Well, as the year progressed, parishes were asked to focus on creation care, liturgy, worship, racial justice and reconciliation, discipleship, evangelism, and generosity, among other topics. The year was supposed to end with a celebratory weekend in December featuring our presiding bishop, Most Reverend Michael Curry, who offered to share his preaching and fellowship with us. The weekend was also supposed to offer a lecture by the well-known death penalty lawyer, Bryan Stevenson, director of the Equal Justice Initiative and founder of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously caused us to push the pause button on many of these activities in recent months, and quite possibly our December gathering with the presiding bishop and Bryan Stevenson. Russell and the Jubilee Committee chairs met via Zoom last Monday to discuss alternative plans to go forward, even if remotely, with the presiding bishop and Bryan Stevenson. Fortunately, COVID-19 has not prevented us from gathering for these Wednesday evenings with Dr. Catherine Meeks. And this brings me while we're gathered together via Zoom tonight. Jubilee Committee's theme for the month of August is racial justice and reconciliation. In the words of presiding Bishop Michael Curry, we made a commitment to live into being the Jesus movement by committing to evangelism and the work of reconciliation, beginning with racial reconciliation across the borders and boundaries that divide the human family of God. Well, to help us achieve that purpose, we have enlisted the help of Dr. Catherine Meeks. She's the executive director of the Absalom Jones Episcopal Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. And she's helping us dive deeper into our Learn, Pray, and Act commitment by exploring systemic, institutional, and personal racism and learn what we can do to dismantle it. I will let Dr. Meeks introduce tonight's topic of healing momentarily. Incorporating the 4 quadrants of becoming beloved community curriculum used by the Episcopal Church, and those quadrants are telling the truth, proclaiming the dream, practicing the way, and repairing the breach. We will walk together with the hope of recognizing all manner of racism and work for its eradication. The Jubilee Committee resources for August and the remainder of the year can be found in your Jubilee Toolkit at your local parishes. And again, thank you for being here tonight. And I will turn this over to Sonia Crawford, who will introduce Dr. Catherine Meeks.
Thank you, Thach. Again, I'm Sonia Crawford. I'm a member of the Commission on Racial Justice and Reconciliation as well. And before I introduce Dr. Meeks, I want to mention a few housekeeping notes that on how the rest of the evening is going to go. First, Dr. Meeks is going to give her presentation, and then we're going to move into some smaller breakout sessions, and we have a few discussion questions that Dr. Meeks has given us. So we'll have some time in a small group to talk about those. And then we're going to come back to the big session and the bigger group, and we'll have Q&A with Dr. Meeks. So as you're listening to her presentation tonight, if you have questions that you'd like her to answer, please put those in your chat box. And that'll be in one of the corners of your screen, depending on what kind of device you have. Other commission members are going to keep track of those questions, and Dr. Meeks will get to as many of those as possible after our breakout sessions. Also, we do encourage you to stick around for the breakout sessions. Even if you don't want to speak in the small group, you're still welcome to simply be present and listen if that's what's most comfortable. But last week we did have further rich discussion in those groups and with the Q&A that followed, so you don't want to miss that. Again, if you have a question, please just put it in the chat box and we'll get to those. As I shared last week, Dr. Meeks has had a strong influence in my personal journey doing racial healing work. 2 of her books have been very helpful to me: Living into God's Dream, Dismantling Racism in America, which she edited, and the recently published Passionate for Justice, Ida B. Wells as Prophet for Our Time, which she co-authored. I appreciate Dr. Meeks's gift for combining information and formation, the head and the heart. I believe she combines the intellectual bent of an academic with a theological understanding of a deeply spiritual person who seeks truth and healing. And Dr. Meeks continues to be a treasured and gracious mentor and resource for our commission. And just to review from last week, if you weren't here with us, Dr. Meeks currently serves as the executive director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta. And I encourage you to check out their website or follow them on Facebook. There's a lot of resources and offerings, and what her newer emphasis and focus will be. She's the retired Clara Carter Acree Distinguished Professor of Sociocultural Studies from Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia, and the founding executive director of the Lane Center for Community Engagement and Service. She has a master's degree in social work from Clark Atlanta University, and her PhD is from Emory. She often presents commentaries on Georgia Public Radio and other radio and TV programs, and she's recently started a podcast, A Brave Space with Dr. Meeks. What I most appreciate about her is how she describes herself as a midwife to the soul of her students and workshop participants. So as you listen and learn tonight, I invite you to also pay attention to the stirrings in your own soul. Perhaps the Spirit is seeking to birth something in each of us. Dr. Meeks?
Thank you so much, Sonia. And it's so kind of you to have all those nice things to say. And I appreciate them deeply. And I'm always so glad to know that I've done something to help an individual person in their own journey to wholeness and wellness. And thank all of you who've taken the time to come and be with us tonight. I know life is busy and complex, and I'm always humbled and honored that people will take out time to come and sit and hear what I have to say, and also are willing to engage this challenging work of trying to find the pathway to racial healing. So there are a few things I want to say that I hope will be very helpful to you as you engage your own journey. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is recorded in the Gospel of John, where Jesus is at the pool of Bethsaida, and this gentleman is lying there cripple, and he's telling Jesus, I've been lying here for 30 years and nobody has helped me to get into the pool. When the angel comes, you remember the story, the angel will come and trouble the water. When the angel comes and shakes up the water, if you can get yourself in the pool, there are healing powers that are somehow healing occurs for those folks. So this man has been lying there for 30 years and nobody's helped him. And, you know, if somebody had said that to me, I would have been just incensed and saying, how could they be so cruel, these folks, that they didn't bother to help you? Didn't they see you here? You know, how self-centered, a whole bunch of things I would have had to say. Instead of Jesus saying any of those little things that I would have thought were so important to say, Jesus said to him, do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? And you know, for a long time, I read that story and I didn't pay too much attention to that question. And then one time, as Howard Thurman says, you know, you wake up, you're reading something and it's like you get hit by the smell of ammonia, and you wake up, you hear something, you see something, you've been reading over it for a long time and it never occurred to you. And now all of a sudden it caught you, and it caught me. And when it caught me, it made me realize that what Jesus is saying to him and saying to us is that the first step in the process to getting well, to healing, is to decide that you really want to be well. Because once you decide you want to be well, then you are ready to do whatever it takes to get well. So I think that when we come to racial healing in the United States, I have to ask myself, do I think my country wants to be well? And when I ask myself that question, my answer is I don't think so. But I do want to believe that my church wants to be well. I have to believe that we who have decided to follow Jesus and who have decided to be the body and family of God do in fact want to be well. And I mean, that's anybody. I'm not just talking about the Episcopal Church, but since I'm talking probably tonight mostly to Episcopalians, we can stick with Episcopalians, or you can think about the Church Universal. But I want to believe that we want to be well. And if then that is the fact, then there's some things that we need to consider and some things that we need to think about doing. One of the first things we have to do is separate the journey for racial healing from our concept of social justice. We love to put this in the social justice category, so then we can decide if we want to bother with it or not. And really, if it's about spiritual formation, if it's about getting well, there's a really different kind of mandated energy that needs to be engaged than if it's just a social justice issue. We might choose to do it or not choose to do it, depending upon how we see the world. I believe that racial healing and telling the truth, as we talked about last week, and then healing around what that truth is not about just a social justice. It is about our getting well as a people. It is about our spiritual formation. It is about us becoming the people that God put us on the earth to be. God did not set up these constructs that we have put in place that has caused the illness that's walking across our land, causing the disparities and the suffering and all of the different kinds of ways in which we have not been God's family, and ways in which we have created spaces that does not make it possible for beloved community to be realized. So I want to talk about a couple of concepts here. And I do believe that it's really important for us in the church to become more conversant with some of these ideas. I believe that everybody carries around with them an inner community that you have, and if you think about this, and I'm getting ready to try to say a whole lot of stuff that has taken me years to learn and years to understand in a succinct and concise and quick way. So if you think about all of the different voices that you hear when you're trying to do something, the different voices that come into play, the kinds of contrary ones and the ones that agree with you and the ones that disagree with you, that are all inside your own head. Some of you who are on this call are probably old enough to remember Flip Wilson, who used to always say when he got into a tight spot or he did something that people were appalled about, he would always say, well, the devil made me do that. Well, maybe not so much the devil, but those contrary members of your inner community. In some psychological circles, we talk about people having a persona and a shadow. And in the shadow, there are these hidden parts that we're not that conversant with. We don't know them that well. The persona is the clothing that we wear, the way we present ourselves to the world, the kind of identification with the ego, and the way we choose to have the world experience us. All of us, no matter who you are, no matter how old you are, how young you are, how rich or how poor, black, white, brown, male, female, whoever, everybody has to struggle with these kinds of constructs. They may not be named. You don't have to know them. You don't have to know their names. You don't have to ever have heard about them. But there's still that dynamic that's operating in every human being, that there are parts of yourself that you don't know as well as other parts. I like to talk about this in kind of common terms as your inner community. And I think that it's really important to find out who lives there. Who are those parts? Whose voices are you listening to? All of us have grown up in families. We've grown up in communities. We've gone to school. We've gone to church. We have a whole lot of narratives that have been played out in front of us. And we've taken some of those things inside of ourselves. And we have decided how we will look at the world based upon a lot of that. One of the things that we did in this country way back in the day was we invented white and blackness. We invented whiteness by lumping all of the folks that came from different parts of Europe and other places whose skin was not black or brown. We called them white. Rather than calling them Welsh or Irish or Scottish, we called them white. And then all of the people that were black or brown, instead of calling them Mandinka or Wolof or Dogon or Serahule, we called them black. And so we created this black-white kind of construct that lumped people all into a basket. And then we decided to set up certain kinds of constructs to figure out how you ought to deal with those people. And all of that's the external world that I'm talking about. But internally, we had a bunch of categories too, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to be so happy to do the stuff we've done externally. So when you think about we invented this kind of setup, these structures, these boundaries, and then we decided what we wanted to have black represent and what white was going to represent. And then inside of ourselves, we have different parts that are representing different things, and we hear different voices. So what you might conclude from what I've just said is that there's a little bit of conflict going on inside of most human beings. It takes a little bit of work to separate all this stuff out and to kind of make sense out of it. And so along with all of that, we somehow wove into it a bunch of fears about each other because we made up stories. Maybe there were some parts of ourselves we didn't like so much. And instead of really dealing with it, we just assigned it to those folks that were out there. There were things about us that made us feel like some of us in this society, white people, got the message that white skin was superior to black or brown skin. And black and brown people got the message that black skin was inferior in many ways. So we ended up with these constructs of white supremacy, white privilege, and internalized depression, and a kind of people who felt like they had a right to occupy certain spaces that the black and brown people didn't have a right to. Now, none of you who are listening to me had anything to do with this. This all got set up before you got here, before I got here. But we have inherited this. We have inherited this way of seeing the world and being in the world. And we have this structure, this psychological structure inside of us that I probably got started with the beginning of time. I think human beings have been living with these challenges since the beginning of time, because no matter how far you go back and look into history, you see people struggling with each other and having a hard time with one another. So we don't have a corner on this market. We're just in the marketplace with the whole of humanity. The problem is that this was not God's intention for us. And so we cannot live in peace until we work some of this stuff out. So what do you do with these external constructs and these internal conflicts and the fears that have gotten attached to them and the ways in which we want to hold on to all of this? How can you be a whole person if you don't let go of some of this stuff? How can you be a well person if you're not willing to interrogate some of these ideas and let them be brought into the light that God shines and find your way to healing and wholeness? Now, you see, God didn't create anybody who was better than anybody else. The trouble is that most of the time, half of us don't believe that, or probably more than half. We actually do think that some folks are better than others, and particularly the ones we like the best and the ones we have assigned certain kinds of values to. And all of us have our list of folks that we'd like to put on a spaceship and give them a one-way ticket to go someplace else and stay for the rest of eternity. I get that. We've got those kinds of folks that just rub us the wrong way and make it difficult for us to be able to see them the way we ought to. But the bottom line is, you do, in the process of deciding if you want to be well, you also have to decide if you want to believe that there's one God who's made everybody and loves everybody equally and is the God of creation of everything that's alive, or if you believe there are many gods who made some things and some people inferior to other people. You do have to get that straight for yourself. And I think most of the time we don't confront that in ourselves. We don't interrogate that issue. But if I walk around putting people on pedestals and other people down in the ditch, then I'm saying to myself that I think some people are better than other people. And then I can deal with them in those kinds of ways. And to the extent that I do that, I am not going to be a well person. So we rush so quickly to talk about reconciliation. It's a word that I have come to decide that I wish we could just put it away for a good little bit and do some of this other work that we need to do. Because you cannot reconcile what you won't own, you actually cannot reconcile with what you've never had a relationship with. And in this country, there has never been viable adult relationships between Black and white people across the board. And I'm not saying that some person here or there didn't have a good relationship with somebody. I'm not trying to be that judgmental. But in terms of historically, the relationships have been hierarchical and they have been based upon the supremacy paradigm. And that paradigm has not left space for equity. And real relationship is between people who come together with a sense of equity, equalness, equal human beings that respect and care about each other. And more than that, who see the face of God, who are willing to see the face of God in one another, which is what we say all the time in the Episcopal Church. We respect the dignity of everybody, we say. And then we turn right around and we have a hierarchy of value for human beings. I mean, honestly, but that's because we got these community members that stand over in the corner inside of us saying, well, no, that person's not as good as you. Think about all the wonderful things you've done and look at what they've done. Think how kind you are and how mean and hateful they happen to be. The judgment, we have the little judger that walks around inside of us. And then we have all these other kinds of little energy systems that operate inside of us that help us to justify whatever those little negative notions are that we have decided to allow ourselves to camp out with. This conversation is a conversation of love and appreciation for the complexity of trying to be a well human being in the world. This conversation reflects my own journey, the journey that I struggle with and I observe every other human being on the planet struggling with. We have to come to terms with that everybody is a beloved child of God and everybody deserves to be well, including us. So what do we have to do? The first thing we have to do is answer that question that Jesus asked the man at the pool. Do I want to be well? I suffer from rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis is nothing to play with. And I know good and well, if I want to be well, there are things I cannot do. I cannot have all the sugar I want. There's certain foods that I cannot eat. There's certain stresses that I cannot allow myself to get into because it affects my physical being to get too stressed out. I have to rest a certain amount. There are just many of things that I have to be very careful about if I want to be well. If I don't want to be well, I can do those things. So if I want to eat a bunch of cake and ice cream and get up for the next 5 days hobbling around, that's a choice I can make. But it's a dumb choice. And I have to confess that there's sometimes I've been dumb enough to make it because I've thought, that cake was just worth more than being able to walk well for 2 or 3 days. And it's silly. And it's just as silly as hanging on to bigotry and ideas that hold parts of myself hostage. So to the extent that I am willing to let go of that stuff, then I'm able to feel and experience mobility in a way that I'm not if I don't do it. So arthritis, I say in a lot of my ways when I describe myself, arthritis has become my most profound teacher because it has taught me a lot about taking care of myself. It's also taught me a lot about the way I need to deal with myself in terms of just trying to be a well person. So I think one of the most important questions that I want you to ponder tonight as we are talking about healing in terms of racial healing, which I think is what we have to do before we ever even begin to think there's any possibility that we're going to get to reconciliation. We love to talk about racial reconciliation, and then we have these Sundays when we swap pulpits and choirs and we have picnics and we do stuff that makes us think that we're doing something great. The white church visits the black church and the black church preacher goes and preaches in the white church and you swap, it's all a bunch of activity that makes us feel like we have done something when we really didn't bother to deal with the root system and the root causes of why we're disparate in the first place and why we are not able to be sisters and brothers as God has said that we are, that God would like us to be. God did not create second-class people, second-class citizens, second-class humans. God did not create anybody who's not as good as anybody else. And God's desire for us is that we should be family. And you know how we've got every one of us has got somebody in our family that's a pill. We got these people that we just cringe sometimes from the things they say and they do and the way they are. And sometimes they even cause us pain and suffering, but at the end of the day, they are still family. And if we have to walk across hot coals to get to them, to help them out of messes that they make for themselves, we will do it. And this is what we are called to do as sisters and brothers around racial healing. We are called to go on this inner journey, to become healed ourselves, to allow those little energy systems running around, destabilizing us and making us afraid, and allowing us to create hierarchical human beings, hierarchical notions of human beings that are some more valuable than others. All those little energy systems that reside inside of us that allow us to play that game with ourselves need to be brought into the light of God's grace and mercy if we really want to be well. So we have to answer that question. I cannot answer that question for you. I can only answer that question for myself. The only thing I can do is tell you that I'm a wounded person who found out where the bandage closet is, and I had to ask if I wanted to be well before I had permission to visit it. And you can visit that bandage closet by asking yourself that question and deciding that you want to say yes. Is it more important to you to be well than to be white? Is it more important to you to be well than to be Black or brown? Is it more important to you to be well than to hold on to supremacist ideas or to hold on to ideas that reflect internalized depression? Internalized depression is what ends up happening to people who are oppressed when they begin to believe the oppressor's narrative about them. And many of us who live in Black skins and brown skins have to struggle with that because that narrative has been played so loudly and so long until we have to work to overcome it. And even when we think we are not bound by it in any way, we can catch ourselves doing things that say we somehow don't quite love the people who look like us as much as we should. White supremacy, white people have got to deal with that. Internalized depression, Black and brown people have to deal with that if we want to be on the healing train. If we want to move from what we learn when we talk about the culture and the character of it and the structures that we have created and the ways in which we have denigrated each other, if we want to, once we talk about that last week, we were talking about telling the truth, talking about Native people and all of the stuff that happened with them. But that doesn't do you any good if you're just going to get immobilized, if you're just going to dig your heels in and say, well, that's all here. That was back there then. I didn't do any of that. I didn't have anything to do with it. That's not good enough. You didn't have anything to do with it, but the benefit of those structures still exist in this culture today. And you are either resisting it to become a well person, whether you're Black, brown, or white, you're resisting it to become a well person, or you're complicit with it. You're holding on to it and benefiting from it and defending it, both inside your own heart and soul and out in the external world. Those are the two places to stand. You're either a resistor or you're complicit. Now, so you benefit. How do I benefit? You know, I'm an educated woman and I've got a pretty good pension. So I am a woman of privilege, even though I'm a woman who also knows racial oppression. And I have to be willing to interrogate my commitment to that privilege in terms of if it's gonna stand in the way of me being a well person. If I become more concerned about maintaining my privilege and what goes with it and looking okay and not rocking the boat and not making white people mad at me in order to stay in some kind of place where it feels like I'm better off than if I didn't do all that. But I need to let go of all that stuff in order to be really a well person and won't do it, then I'm doing myself a great disservice. And yes, there are Black and brown people who have decided that to be able to be in this little bubble of privilege that comes to us because we've done some of the things that have been identified that you need to do to get there. We've done those and we've made it a little bit up the ladder. We'd hold on to that in ways that make us not want to tear down those structures inside of ourselves that keep us from being totally liberated. If we want to be totally liberated, we have to decide that liberation matters more than being a defender of white supremacy or being a defender of Black and brown achievement and the places that we have managed to kind of claw our way into getting in some instances. We have to also decide that we trust God enough to get on the train. We trust God enough to put our foot in the water. Somebody said, and I love this image, that you know, when the Israelites were standing at the Red Sea with the Egyptians bearing down on them, that the waters didn't part until somebody put their toe in it. There's got to be a stepping out in faith a little bit. So how do you need to step out in faith? How do you need to interrogate those voices inside yourself that when you see, if you're a white person and you know good and well you need to speak up, but you don't speak up because then folks are gonna call you names or do something, or at least you think you're gonna lose something. You know how much you need to have enough faith to put your toe in the water. And if you put your toe in the water, God will be there, because God is just waiting for you to have the faith of a mustard seed to get on the train. And if you're a Black person who's come through oppression and degradation and maybe poverty and other things, and you know that you need to stand up for your sisters and brothers, Black or maybe white, because sometimes you do need to speak up. We do need to speak up as Black people, for white people who are in the process of trying to be well, and you don't do it, then you are also not being very trusting. We have to interrogate ourselves. We have to be willing to ask hard questions of ourselves. We have to be willing to speak to those parts of ourselves that want to undermine us when we are trying to figure out how to really live in the world. So I want to invite you to think hard about this talk tonight. Think hard about how well are you, and how much more wellness do you need to seek? And what would it look like if you allowed yourself to get on that train in a new way? That's a question that I have to ask myself a lot of days, because there's some days when the idea of making greeting cards and playing with essential oils seems mighty wonderful to me. And rather than out here trying to really keep on being a warrior woman, keep on speaking for justice and trying to stand up and say, let's get well. There are days when it just seems inviting to want to sit in the rocking chair and watch old dumb movies. And I do a little bit of it when I have those days, because it's important to take a few breaks on the journey toward wholeness. It is important, because some days you just need a break. But you take a break always with the understanding that the train just stopped and let you off for a minute, and you're going to get back on it. You're going to get back on the train and travel. You're going to stay on the journey. How do we do that? How do we do that? You do it by trusting in God, being willing to interrogate yourself, being willing to look at all of those parts of yourself that keep on stepping up to the plate and trying to take over and trying to tell you that feeling you have way down deep inside that you need to do something needs to be run over. You need to talk yourself out of it. But you know better. You know you don't need to talk yourself out of it. We know we need to say yes. And we go against that. We keep naming the truth for ourselves and for our community, and we keep holding each other not only accountable, but holding each other in our hearts as sisters and brothers, holding each other in our hearts and believing that God means for all of us to be well. And even though we meet each other in different places on our journeys, we're always willing to share where you can find a bandage. I want to conclude these remarks so you have plenty of time to do the discussion, because I believe the questions for the discussion are just as important as any words I might have to say. But I want to conclude them with just a piece of a poem from John O'Donohue, because I happen to love John O'Donohue so much. He's an Irish priest and poet who was just an amazing soul. And this poem is actually a part of a prayer that's to be offered in the morning, but I'm just going to read the last two paragraphs because those are the ones that really speak to what I'm talking about right now. May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers inside myself. This is not what he says. I'm adding this in. New frontiers inside myself that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. And that's another piece of what healing is about, is being willing to become somebody new, somebody we haven't seen before. You know, not all in 1 minute, because if you do, you'll scare yourself to death, but over a period of time to be transformed, because that is the journey of spiritual formation, to be transformed, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more. Our culture, our country right now is just eaten up with fear, and it's just time for us, people of faith, to let it go. To let it go, not to let ourselves get caught up in it, to stand with Jesus at that pool and answer with that man, yes, I want to be well, Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm putting my foot in the water, and I'm expecting God to meet me. And I'm expecting to become transformed by the light and love that God has been shining. And once I am transformed, racism will become an untenable energy system for me, because I will be well and getting more well every day. And there is no place for denigration and second-class citizenship and arguing with myself about seeing the face of God in every human being that God has made. May God bless you, and may you have amazing courage. May your courage potion be increased in phenomenal ways in the days and weeks to come. And may you interrogate yourselves, and may you ask God what else it is that you need to do to be well. Amen.
I've got some questions that have been submitted that folks would like Dr. Meeks to speak upon. And so I'm going to offer as many as I can in the time we have. And Dr. Meeks, are you back on? Yeah, there you are. Good.
I left for a while. I was trying to dodge from the small groups. So.
I understand. We have some questions here. And the first one is, what do I say to someone who is adamant that there's no such thing as systemic racism or white privilege?
Well, it depends on whether or not it's a person that has some capacity to reason. You know, what I think the first thing I would want to know is what has led them to that conclusion? How do they understand history? Would be important for me to understand. Before I would try to convince them that they're wrong, I would like to know how they got to that place of thinking that way. And then I would really try to pay attention to how invested is that person in holding on to that viewpoint, because it's a viewpoint that's grounded in fantasy. And sometimes people are so committed to fantasy because if they start pulling on the cord, they know that a whole bunch of stuff is going to unravel, and they don't have the courage to go down that road. So there's no one thing you can say. I think you have to play the curiosity game with them and see how they come to be that way. And what is it in their upbringing and their history and their way of seeing the world that makes them invested in holding on to that point of view? Because then you can maybe talk about some of that stuff quicker and easier than you can the other, because you're never gonna just argue somebody into changing their mind about that. That doesn't work.
Okay. I have another question. It says, isn't it kind of insulting for a white person to seek out a relationship with a person of color to prove that they are not a racist?
Yeah, I think it would be also insulting to seek out a relationship with a white person to prove anything like that too. You know, who wants to be the object of your of something like that? You want to seek out relationships with people because you really want to be in relationship. And you know, I really don't think that that doesn't actually prove you're not racist anyway. It just proves that you can go pretend. It proves that you're good at pretending. And if you're going to be that disingenuous, you've got some other problems that are just about as serious as being racist. So nobody should do that. Nobody should go trying to make friends with somebody just to prove their progressiveness, because that's not how you prove that. You know, you want to be an authentic human being, and you want to really be somebody who connects to people at the point of authenticity, and because there's something in you that wants to really know who that person is and would think that your life would be better, and maybe their life would be too if you connected to one another. You know, that's a game, and I don't believe we ought to play games like that.
Right. Dr. Meeks, I just got this question. It says, could you speak a bit about what you meant by brave space in question number 2?
Yeah, spaces where we're willing to tell the truth. We're always talking about safe space. We always want spaces that don't challenge us. That's my understanding of what we mean by safe space. We want to be in spaces where we can talk about hard things, but do it in a kind of soft pedaling way so that everybody can go home feeling nobody's disturbed. And so the poem I read said, you know, let me be willing to be disturbed. So brave spaces are spaces, I think, where you can be disturbed, but not be destroyed. You can be disturbed. You can hear things that you can hear the truth. You can be challenged to interrogate yourself. You can be challenged to change your way of thinking and being, and still know that you're loved and appreciated, and that you're still a worthy human being that's loved by God. That's the kind of space. And we say the Center for Racial Healing is a brave space where a compassionate truth will be told. And it's a brave space where we can do that. So I just think that we need to have more of those kinds of places where we're willing to tell the truth and still be loving. I'm not going to throw you away just because, you know, you're not as progressive as you might want to become. You don't get thrown out of the family. You don't get thrown out of the family because you're a hooligan. You know, we got our little hooligan members, and we don't throw them out of the family. They keep on showing up, and we keep on caring about them. So God didn't throw us away because of our stuff, and we don't throw each other away because of our stuff. Anyway.
I just want to make an observation in response to that, and I think I may have mentioned it to you. The first time that Gary, Joe, Russell, and myself spoke with you in anticipation of this series, my response was to them after we were through, I said, no one has made all of us squirm in our seats as much as she had. And you did. And it was great because it made us think. And you were kind, and you were very pointed. But that's, I really enjoyed that. I mean, it made me think.
And I think it's a loving, kind thing. It's loving and kind for somebody to help you move along in the process that you need to move along into to become who God put you on the earth to be. That's loving and kind. And if we do it with judgment and disdain for the person, we have no right to be speaking to them. If we're not willing to be loving and kind, we need to keep our mouths closed, because then we're hurting people. And trying to tell the truth is not about trying to hurt people. It is about trying to help people become who they were put on the earth to be.
The next question is, tell us about how effective K through 12 schools address racism, its history, effects, and solutions.
Well, they are dismal at it. They don't. And that's a very unfortunate thing. And it's leaving us with continuously growing generations of people who are unconscious and who don't know the history. my friends who I talk with about this, who have children in public schools and private schools or wherever they happen to be, people are not teaching a genuine history to really help the children grow up with a different understanding of each other. And then we have the audacity to think that the kids are going to be different. I mean, it just aggravates me to no end that we do that, because how are they supposed to be different? They're not learning anything different. They're learning the same old history. And eventually, even though they may be friends when they're young and play together and act like they're going to be all liberated, when they get to be old, they'll take their place in the proper structure. And so I think our K through 12 schools need an overhauling when it comes to this. We need history books that tell the truth. And that's why the center has developed the Dismantling Racism curriculum for 6th to 12th graders. And we're getting ready to develop a curriculum for K through 5th grade. So we will then have K through 12th grade. It's only 6 weeks, but it's at least 6 weeks as a start. And if we don't teach a new story, we keep getting the same product.
The next question is, tell us about how the Episcopal Church is working for truth and history curricula in our communities.
Well, I think Sacred Ground is one of the pieces of curricular material that's been developed, that's out to try to help us get a more honest picture of the way things are. The curriculum that I just mentioned, our Dismantling Racism curriculum, we call it youth curriculum for Dismantling Racism, that's now being published by Church Publishing, and people need to take they have to take a Dismantling Racism class in order to be able to be trained to use that curriculum, because we're not just trying to hand it out wholesale. But we do want as many people as possible to take that and to teach the young folks. The Center for Racial Healing is moving itself every day down the road to try to increase the resources and the materials that would be available for folks to use. And I don't know if you know, the Center for Racial Healing that I am the founding director of is a collaborative project between the presiding bishop and the Diocese of Atlanta. And we are mandated with being a resource for the entire Episcopal Church, which we have done in 3 years. We've worked with over 60 dioceses in the church and many outside of the country. So we've become an international center. One of these days, I would like us to have a curriculum and a whole set of accompanying materials that cover kindergarten through high school through adults, so that we would have those materials there. But there are a lot of resources. I mean, there are a lot of things you can select and put together. And once you get on the pathway, there is a lot that can be done. And some of it's been already put into, one package, but we don't have enough of it. We have a long ways to go.
One of our facilitators for the small group discussion sent a question from the group. How do we go about bringing those internal constructs to our own awareness?
Well, you have to pay attention. I mean, you have to be willing to ask some questions of yourself. And everybody on this call is a grown-up. So you can think, and you look around you, and you look at the way things are in this country. And instead of just coming to the same conclusions that we've always come to, why can't Black folks get over racism and all those tired old responses, instead of saying, well, why are people still disturbed? Ask some new questions. That's part of the way. Start with asking some new questions instead of just resorting to the comfort. Don't make the decision that every time you hear a Black or brown person lamenting about their situation, don't try to dismiss it. Don't try to decide that it's got no basis. Be curious, be willing to ask questions and listen for the answer. And be curious to ask people in your circle. If you don't know Black or brown people, then Go ask some white person who's halfway awake. Why are they worried? Why are they talking? What's going on? Asking questions will be a good place to start.
Okay. Another question is, racism is such a massively complex issue. What can I, as a single individual, do to end racial strife that exists in the country?
Yeah. Well, it's one step at a time. And so you start with deconstructing the stuff inside yourself that makes you other anybody. You start interrogating yourself about the way you think of people, the way you look at the world, the way you make assessments. That's the personal piece. And then just look at the places where there's inequity in the country and make up your mind that you will be a resistor against those things, that you will not be quiet. Like when you look at the inequities in health and education and housing, that you won't try to explain those things away. That's the first place. And then you work every day. You have a position that says, I stand against anything that oppresses anybody anywhere. And you go out into the world with that stance. And if people want to tell jokes about that make somebody the brunt, like people like to tell jokes that have to do with different ethnic groups, something as little as that, you don't tolerate. You don't let yourself fall into the category of being complicit with expressions of anything that denigrates another human being. It is amazing how much energy could be turned into negative stuff, could be turned into positive stuff if we just made the internal commitment that you don't get to talk oppression and act like it and acquiesce about it in my presence. Oh yeah, people will talk about you a little bit and say you're always playing the race card and blah, 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 but you have to not care. You have to care about your own liberation, which is internal, and then external liberation out there in the world. You have to care about it more than what people say. And that's what you can do. I mean, it might sound like a little bit, but it's a lot. The personal stance and the commitment to live in the world in a way that says, I stand against this. When you're in your board meetings and your vestry meetings and people are slighting somebody, you speak up. You don't let it go by. You take the chance. You say, maybe you can't fix it all, but you can let folks know that it needs to be fixed. Even if you can't fix everything, because none of us can fix everything. There's a whole bunch of stuff. At the end of the day, at the end of every day, I think about how many things are wrong and what have I really done today? And I know that I have stood true to the commitment to be a resistor to oppression inside of myself. I'm not going to let one part of myself oppress another part. I'm not going to disparage myself. I'm not going to say bad things about myself. And I'm not going to externalize any of that stuff to other people. If even half the country took that position, we would be surprised at how much different the world would be. And we claim that's what we believe. Isn't that the baptismal covenant? Somebody just put up something about dignity. Don't we say that we will, honor the dignity in everybody, that we will see the face of God in people? If we just did that, we'd be surprised, because then we would act differently if we internalize that truth to the depths of ourselves.
Dr. Meeks, those are all the questions that I've got that had not already been touched on. Does anyone have a question they would like to submit?
Well, there are a few more things that I want to say about resources, because I know that people are always looking for good resources. So I want to recommend to you, if you're in your house, get a pencil or a pen, and maybe somebody will write it in the chat box. I'm not the best at trying to talk and write at the same time. Robert P. Jones, who wrote The End of white American Christianity, has written a new book called White Too Long. And it's an excellent book that really does get into some of these issues that I talked about tonight in terms of the invention of whiteness. And then Joy DeGruy, the book is, her name is spelled Joy, J-O-Y, and then D small e capital G-U-R-Y, has written a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Joy DeGruy, and then Robert Jones, White Too Long. And then there's there are tons of things that you can read, but these two books, I think, could be really helpful in dealing with the issues of white supremacy and dealing with the issue of internalized depression. Internalized depression is that has to do with people who have been oppressed, and Black and brown folks in the United States have to struggle with that. And we don't want to own it because we don't want to act like anything's wrong with us, but then we don't treat each other right. And so whether we want to own it or not, it manifests itself in the culture. And so it's another one of those places where the first thing you got to do is tell the truth before you can do anything else. You know, James Baldwin said that you might not be able to heal everything you name, but you won't heal anything that you won't name. And I think that for us as Black and brown people, we have to name how we have been injured by racism and in terms of our internal processes. And white people need to really work on how they have been injured by racism too, because that's harder for white people to really come to grips with. There's this kind of sense of racism has done something bad to Black folks and brown folks, but the only thing it's done to white people is that it's made them have to feel guilty. That's not true. Anytime that there's a system that oppresses anybody, then everybody is oppressed in one way or another. And so it's so important, I think, to unpack some of that stuff, to name some of that stuff. And I do think that no matter what your environment looks like, if you're in a homogeneous place where everybody looks like you, there's no reason why you can't do this kind of work and interrogate yourself. You can read, you can watch movies, you can talk to people, and you can just ask God to help you be open to asking good questions of yourself, and ask God to send some people to help you with answering those questions. You know what? God is really glad when we decide to turn a corner, because that's God's intention for us anyway. God wants us to be whole people, wants us to be well. And so you will get the most help you have ever gotten to when you turn yourself in that direction. And I want to say that I think that God has given, I think I might have said this last week, and if I did, I'm going to say it again, because I think it needs to be said over and over. And I've said this to the presiding bishop, and I've said it to many people. I think that some weeks ago, when Donald Trump stood in front of St. John's Church and held up the Bible, that God sent a message to us. God wrote us people of faith, and especially us Episcopalians, a letter. And I used to be with my little flip self, always ready to tell God, if you really want me to do this, you just better write me a letter, because I'm not going to go off half-cocked here. I got to know for sure before I go risking my neck. And I think God wrote us a letter, and said, you people who call yourselves people of faith, this is time for you to stand up a little taller. This is time for you to get a little bit more in the game here. This is time for you to start asking a new set of questions. And then to top it all off, we all sitting up in our houses. We can't go sit in the church house and hide like we like to do. And so we have, we feel vulnerable because we got this horrible virus we have to worry about it killing us. And so we're trying to stay well, stay alive, and we can't even go to church the way we're used to going. And then we get this message from the good Lord. It's like, give us a break. You know, how do we have to do all of this at once? And I think the answer is yes, we do. And I just think that it would be wonderful if we really pay attention to the invitation. If we really pay attention to the invitation to stand up a little taller and to just keep asking ourselves some questions. What can I really do? And then what will I do? Because we can do more than we are oftentimes willing to do, right? I mean, we can talk ourselves out of a lot of things, but I think that we are empowered people. We're educated. We've got resources. We know how to problem solve. You know, after all, we're Episcopalians. I mean, we're proud about that, and we're able to do analysis. And when we want to do something, we figure out how to do it. So we have to get down to, what do I really want to do? And what I really want to do is be standing up here tall, declaring that liberation is really the right way, the right path to be on. And I think we've got to get past this trying to keep folks from talking about things by, you know, my priest friends tell me that every time they try to preach a sermon about healing and justice and all of that stuff, they have folks in their church worried about them being political. I'm just so tired of that nonsense. I just think that we have decided to make some things, we label things so we don't have to deal with them. We label things so we can hide out. You know, we live in the world. This is God's world. This is the world God made. And there's evil walking around on the earth. And our job is to be resisting that and engaging it and doing something with it. And we are called to stand up and name what we see and call upon God to help us to do something. And in order to do that, that's how we get well. And when we are getting well, we'll do it anyway because we won't tolerate the other stuff. That's the one thing about when when the status quo gets to the place that is untenable, we'll change. And so that's why it's kind of like God's just thinking maybe that we needed to be shaken up a little bit here. And we got an invitation, fellow sisters and brothers, clear invitation to sit down and see what we need to do. And then to really come to grips with what you will do, to be honest about it. Don't try to do what Father Thack will do, or Bishop Russell will do, or what I will do, or what Joe will do, or Gary. What will you do? What will you do? How will you ask God to give you, to empower you, to give you the push, the courage, to make you a little braver? But the other poet that I like as much as John O'Donohue is David White, and he and John O'Donohue were really good friends. And David White has a poem about being a half a shade braver. So how can you be a half a shade braver? And you don't have to go walk in the street. You don't have to go lead a protest. You don't have to go to the legislature. You don't have to run for office. You have to find out what God wants you to do. And that is probably the toughest thing, because as long as we can say, well, I can't do what that person's doing and that person's doing, so I guess I don't have to do anything. That's not the right answer. The right answer is, what do you want me to do? You know, you all just got through celebrating Jonathan Daniels, and Jonathan Daniels was ready to ask the question of, what do I need to do? And here I am, Lord, send me to do whatever it is that I need to do. And it got him killed. And so, and you know, hopefully we won't get killed, but Jesus got killed too. And we're following Jesus. And so I think sometimes we forget that. We forget that we're following somebody that got hung on a cross. Sometimes I think we act like we think we're following somebody who just joined a country club. And that's just not who Jesus is. So And I'm not trying to be a martyr, believe me, that's not on my list of aspirations, but I do believe that allowing ourselves to be held hostage by fear and not wanting to rock the boat has caused a lot of trouble and continues to do so. So I don't know, Father Thack, are there any other comments or questions, and if or not?
Someone, I believe Holly raised her hand. Holly, are you on? Holly? Okay, well, apparently.
Holly has a little muted thing by her name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I see her up here on the screen, but I don't see her.
Okay, well.
Well, maybe.
Robbie, can you unmute Holly?
I tried and asked. She
Okay.
not responding.
Okay.
So one of the questions that was asked tonight was how, you know, how people are seeing the diocese and the parish as well as their community in terms of healing. And I don't, there's still a lot of folks on the call and too many to try to hear from, but I just want everybody to really be thinking about all of this, both in terms of your personal healing, but the collective healing too. And the more we are willing to engage healing on a personal level, the more possibilities there will be for collective healing. But there are some actions that have to be taken in the external world to help make that world better. And people need to vote, people need to talk, people need to pay attention. And you need to, you know, right now, I would encourage everybody to write letters to your congresspeople about the post office. We need to save the post office. You know, and the post office is a nonpartisan public service to every little hamlet in this country. And I grew up in Arkansas where the best time of the day was when the mailman came, because I was always looking for, you know, I would enter these contests and think I was going to win. Like, I don't even know if they still make Cheer washing powder, but I used to enter the Cheer washing powder contest. And then I would be looking for my prize that was coming from Cheer, like a little kid waits for Christmas. And you know, people, that's still a lot of that's still going on. And I want to say that for somebody who has spent a lot of time studying equity and inequity, that the Postal Service was one of the places where Black and brown and poor people stood a better chance to get a decent job, and was one of the systems in the society that came the closest to practicing equity than any of the rest of them. And so it's important. You know, we need to stay awake, and we need to be able to discern the things that we need to turn our hearts to, and not let ourselves get caught up in splitting up the world in little categories and then naming them and being unable and unwilling to act out of integrity and compassion and love and real commitment of trying to allow God to help us see how we can respect everybody's dignity and see God's face. Holly is back. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just think that sometimes there's a fine line between the dignity of people and standing a little taller. And I think that can get confusing to some who maybe don't agree with what you're saying or what you're trying to say, and that can lead to a lot of actual pain, which is a situation that happened to me. So, you know, standing taller is important, but it can be a tough way to go when you run into people that don't agree with you.
Yeah. And I think that you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's worth bearing the pain, and sometimes it's not.
Yes.
And you have to be discerning. You know, Jesus said, don't throw your pearls in front of swine. And I don't exactly know all of what that means, but part of what that means to me is to be discerning. So if I'm trying to talk to somebody, and they're like, somebody asked a question earlier about how do you talk to somebody who just doesn't believe that there's systemic racism? Well, you do your best, and then you decide if that person is just, you know, ready to kind of beat you up every time you're in a conversation, or if it's somebody, you know, the real struggle for me as a therapist and teacher is this person being so obnoxious because they're just really trying hard to understand, or are they just being obnoxious because they mean to be obnoxious? And somewhere, some kind of way, you get to answer that question. And you don't have to, there's a rule of thumb. You do not have to be abused by another human being. So if somebody is being abusive in some kind of way to you, you then can say, I'm stepping away from this. You know, I believe that. I don't think God has called us. We might have been called to be killed, but we didn't get called to be abused in conversations and run over and didn't denigrate it. That's not part of the calling. So I think that Holly, you're right, that it can be painful, and there's some pain that you can bear, but you have to decide how much of it you want to bear. I can't tell you to let people do this or that. You have to decide that.
Well, then, and you convinced me I did the right thing. I stepped away. And so I'm glad that that's kind of affirmed what I thought.
Yeah.
So,
and you don't have to beat yourself up. You know you've done, you know how far you've gone, and you know what you've done. And I think that you know, and God knows what you've done, and God knows where your heart is, and God knows how you tried. And we have to come to the place that we are able to let that be enough. You know, at the end, I have felt really badly because I wasn't able to go to the border and get those little children and save them. I felt so bad about that for a while. And then I had to say, Catherine, you are being ridiculous. You have done everything you know how to do, and you just gotta let it go.
Yeah.
You know, you have to let it go. Because, you know, actually, there are days when I want to shake my fist in God's face and say, why don't you just fix it all? And for some reason, God doesn't. So if God's not trying to fix everything, I need to get off of my back and stop trying to be better than God. You know, so God's not fixing everything, but I need to fix everything. That's a little bit too high of an idea about myself. So I think we all have to operate by giving ourselves a little bit of grace, and yet be holding ourselves to a level of integrity. So, and you know when you've gone too far and when you didn't go far enough. You know, we kind of know, we can figure that out, I think. So I pray that everybody will act as courageously as you need to, but that you will also be respectful of yourself and take care of yourself.
Dr. Meeks, thank you tonight. We've gotten several questions since then that we're going to carry over to next week, but we've run out of time. But thank you for this excellent presentation. And I want to thank those who participated tonight. And if you've got questions that you would like me to ask next week, please submit them beforehand, and that would help us decide what we need to do. Want to remind everyone, you have to register for next week's presentation to get online. So please make sure you register so you can get the link. And I hope all of you have a wonderful evening. And thank you, Dr. Meeks.
You're welcome. Good night, and God bless.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.